"Get off that horse. This ranch isn't yours." The woman in the black riding coat stopped at the gate. Across the dusty yard, the new owner stood beside an old red barn, one hand resting on the fence. He looked like exactly what she expected: worn boots, faded jeans, sunburned skin, and a hat that had seen better days. She gave him a cold smile. "You bought my father's ranch." The cowboy nodded. "I did." She laughed softly. "You have no idea what you just bought." Nobody standing there knew that those words would soon mean something very different. His name was Caleb Mercer, and 3 months earlier, Caleb had spent nearly every dollar he owned on a ranch everyone else had given up on. The property had been abandoned for years. The fences leaned. The well barely worked. The house needed repairs from floor to roof. But Caleb saw something other people didn't. Possibility. He had grown up working cattle for other ranchers. He never inherited land. Never had a wealthy family behind him. Every horse, truck, and piece of equipment he owned had been paid for with long days and longer nights. He didn't mind hard work. What he hated was watching good things get thrown away because nobody had the patience to rebuild them. So, when the abandoned ranch went up for sale, Caleb made an offer. It was almost everything he had. The previous owner, a wealthy rancher named Richard Hawthorne, had passed away unexpectedly. His daughter, Claire, had moved away years earlier and rarely returned. Caleb knew very little about her, but he remembered one strange detail from the paperwork. Richard had insisted on keeping one old wooden sign hanging above the barn. It read, "Hawthorne Ranch, where everyone gets a second chance." Caleb didn't understand why that mattered. Not yet. He spent his mornings repairing fences and his evenings fixing the house. When an elderly neighbor needed help moving hay, Caleb helped. When a teenage boy down the road wanted to learn how to ride, Caleb gave him an old saddle and taught him. He never asked for anything back. Then Claire came home, and she wasn't impressed. She stepped through the ranch gate wearing expensive boots that had probably never touched mud before. "You really bought this place?" she asked. "Yes, with your own money." Caleb looked at her. "Yes." She glanced at the broken fence. "Then, I guess you have more courage than sense." Caleb didn't answer. Claire walked toward the house. "My father would have hated this." Caleb frowned. "Hated what?" The word landed harder than he expected. Claire continued. "He spent his whole life building this ranch. Then someone like you buys it for a fraction of what it was worth." Caleb calmly replied, "Your father accepted the offer. He wasn't thinking clearly. That wasn't my decision." Claire's jaw tightened. "I want the property back. You should have made an offer before I bought it. I can pay you more than you paid." Caleb shook his head. "I'm not selling." That was the first time Claire looked genuinely angry. Over the next few weeks, she kept showing up. Sometimes she criticized the repairs. Sometimes she questioned Caleb's decisions. Once, she stood beside a newly repaired fence and said, "You don't belong here." Caleb simply kept working. One afternoon, Claire noticed an old leather notebook sitting on the porch. "What is that?" "My grandfather's journal," Caleb said. "You knew him?" "No. I found it in the house." Claire grabbed it. Caleb didn't stop her. She flipped through several pages until she reached a handwritten note. Her expression changed. "What does this mean?" Caleb looked at the page. "I don't know." She read aloud. "If the ranch ever falls into the wrong hands, remember the promise made in 1987. Claire looked up. "What promise?" Caleb shrugged. "I was hoping you knew." She closed the notebook. "You're hiding something." "No, you're lying." "No." For the first time, Caleb smiled. "I've been called worse." But Claire wasn't smiling. She began digging into the ranch's history, and what she discovered made her even more suspicious. There had been a man named Samuel Mercer who worked on the ranch decades earlier. Caleb's father, the same man Caleb had barely known. Samuel had left the ranch when Caleb was a child after a bitter disagreement with Richard Hawthorne. Nobody ever told Caleb exactly what happened. He only knew his father had carried regret about it until the day he died. Then, One rainy evening, everything changed. Caleb was repairing the old barn roof when a black SUV pulled into the yard. A gray-haired attorney stepped out. Claire followed behind him. "Caleb," she called. He climbed down from the ladder. "What's going on?" The attorney held up a sealed folder. "My name is Martin Wells. I represented Richard Hawthorne for 32 years. Caleb looked at Claire. She seemed just as confused. Martin opened the folder. "Your father left instructions that this document was to be delivered only after the ranch was sold." Caleb's face tightened. "Why?" Martin looked directly at him. "Because the buyer had to be your family." Silence. Caleb stared at the attorney. "I don't understand." Martin pulled out an old contract. "Back in 1987, your father, Samuel Mercer, saved this ranch from foreclosure. Richard promised him a permanent share of the property." Claire whispered, "That's impossible." Martin shook his head. "It was never registered properly. Richard kept the agreement private." Caleb took the document with trembling hands. At the bottom was his father's signature. "And Richard Hawthorne's." Martin continued. "Richard regretted what happened between your families. He spent years trying to find Samuel, but by then, Samuel had moved away." Caleb looked down. His voice became quiet. "My father never knew. He knew something," Martin said. "But he never knew Richard had honored the promise." Claire stared at Caleb. Suddenly, the old barn sign made sense. "Where everyone gets a second chance." Martin handed Caleb another letter. "This was written for you." Caleb opened it. The letter was short. Richard thanked Samuel for saving his family during the hardest year of his life. Then came the final line. "If a Mercer ever comes back, don't let pride keep you apart again." Claire's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Caleb. "All this time," Caleb folded the letter, "your father kept his promise." Claire shook her head. "And I treated you like you were stealing from him." Caleb didn't respond. She looked around the ranch, at the repaired fences, the cleaned barn, the horses Caleb had brought back. The place was beginning to look alive again. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Caleb took off his hat. "You don't have to apologize for what you didn't know." Claire wiped her eyes. "No, but I should apologize for how I treated you." And this time, Caleb nodded. The consequences were quiet. Claire stopped trying to force Caleb off the property. Instead, she used her resources to help restore the ranch. Martin helped settle the old legal claim. The ranch became a partnership, not because Caleb needed Claire's money, but because both finally understood what the land had been meant to represent. A second chance. Months later, the old barn was fully restored. The broken fences were gone. Children from nearby farms came to learn about horses. Neighbors stopped by for coffee, and above the barn, Caleb repaired the old wooden sign. He kept every word exactly as it was. Hawthorne Ranch, where everyone gets a second chance. One evening, Claire stood beside Caleb, watching the sunset. "I thought you were just some poor cowboy trying to take advantage of my father's ranch," she said. Caleb smiled. "And I thought you were just a spoiled rich woman who hated me." Claire laughed. "Maybe we were both wrong." Caleb looked across the fields. "Most people are when they judge too quickly." The ranch didn't become valuable because of money. It became valuable because two people finally chose understanding over pride. And sometimes, the person you underestimate isn't waiting to prove you wrong. They're simply waiting for you to see them clearly. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who never took the time to know your story?